this chapter as Arjuna begins this chapter by asking this question. Setting aside the ordinance of the scriptures, perform sacrifice with faith. What is their condition, O Krishna? Is it sattva, rajas, or tamas? So Arjuna is asking what here? Think about it. And we've already seen the relationship with the end of chapter number 16 when, Bhagwan talked about the ordinance of the scriptures. And at once Arjun's mind is turning towards the question as to if you're talking about the ordinance of the scriptures, suppose now I perform all my transactions with faith, but I don't take into account the ordinances of the scriptures. Now, what kind of condition is that? Is it sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic? So this question really is asking the question about the relationship between faith and the prescription of the scriptures. And what kind of faith is it when the practice, sacrifice, which we call practice, transactional, what the transactions we are doing on a day-to-day basis, based only on faith without the basis in the scriptures? Very interesting question, because it raises the question of what is faith and what do we mean by the scriptures and why should it be based on the authority of the scriptures? So I want to examine this very briefly in terms of these two things, authority of the scriptures and the faith and the relationship between these two things. So first of all, Shabda or Shruti Pramana. Authority of the scriptures or the ordinances of the scriptures can be thought of in terms of Shruti, Shabda, Pramana. Pramana means means of knowledge, knowledge. And in Advaita Vedanta, these pramana are accepted as valid means of knowledge. So question is, what do we mean by valid means of knowledge? Is how do I know what I know? And how do I know that what I know is the truth? This is called a valid means of knowledge. So if somebody says, okay, I imagined this thing and I think that is the truth. Now, is that a valid means of knowledge? Suppose I say I saw something, I imagined it in my mind and I think that is the truth. That is not considered as a valid means of knowledge because there are certain pramana which are accepted in the scriptures, Advaita Vedanta in particular we are talking about here, as valid means of knowledge. What are these? First of all, it is pratyaksha, perception, anumana pramana, upamana, comparison, analogy, arthapati, postulation, presumption, abhava, non-perception, cognitive proof using non-existence. So the non-existence is used as a basis of attaining knowledge, which is also considered as a valid means of knowledge. So here's pratyaksha pramana, and related to pratyaksha pramana is anumana, upamana, arthapati, and abhava. Then the next thing is Shabda Pramana, scriptural knowledge. So keep this in mind, Pratyaksha Pramana, Shabda Pramana. We can think of this as two categories. And Pratyaksha Pramana, of course, is related to the senses, to the mind, to the intellect, whereas Shabda Pramana is related to the scriptural knowledge, testimony of somebody who has already experienced something and is now kind of putting it down in terms of the scriptures. So principle in Advaita Vedanta is this, very important to understand and remember. Brahman cannot be an object of perception. Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, cannot be an object of perception. And therefore, Shankaracharya ji says that this principle is not within the scope of perception as it does not have form, color, or any perceptible attribute. And it cannot be the object of our inference, which means Anumana Praman is ruled out as well, and it does not have property to serve any inferential sign, which rules off all the Pratyaksha Pramana. See how the logic is going to follow. Brahman is not an object of perception. Any means of knowledge which is related to perception of an object has to be ruled out. Why? Because Brahman is not an object of perception. And therefore you can't say, I have seen Brahman, because Brahman is not to be seen. Therefore, to realize Brahman, the only means of knowledge is Shabda Pramana. So that is why Bhagwan is immediately and directly telling Arjun that It is Shabda Praman, which is the most important thing, as he has already mentioned in the end of last chapter. So remember that logic about Shabda Praman and Pratyaksha Praman. We have to rule out Pratyaksha Praman because Brahman is not an object of our perception. And therefore we have to rely on Shabda Praman. Shraddha, let's think about Shraddha. And Bhagwan has already talked about Shraddha in the previous chapters. In number 3, he says, those who are constantly practice this teaching of mine full of faith and without cavilling, they too are freed from action, full of faith. Faith is basis on which this freedom from action is going to take place. Then he goes on to say, the man who is full of faith, who is devoted to it, and who has subdued the senses, obtains this knowledge, and having obtained this knowledge, ere long he goes to the supreme peace. In other words, the final destination is reached by someone who has full faith. Shraddha has to be there. The ignorant, the faithless, the doubting self goes to destruction. There is neither this world nor the other, nor happiness for the doubter. See how faith is so important. And here he says, amongst the yogis who is full of faith, he is the most devout. And Bhagwan says again that endowed with supreme faith, these, in my opinion, are the best in yoga. Supreme faith means we are going to become the best in yoga by having that supreme faith. So Shraddha, then taking it further, in Vivek Chudamani, in verse number 25, Shankaracharya ji explains what Shraddha is. That by which one understands the import of the scriptures as well as the pregnant words of the advice of the preceptor is called by the wise as Shraddha. So it is not unquestioning blind belief in the word of the teacher or the scripture. The student, in fact, is encouraged to express doubt and question the teacher. Shraddha requires full awareness and attention on the part of the disciple. Full awareness and attention. Coming back to the 4 A's. And remember what Gurudev used to say, express doubt. Don't take the word of the teacher for granted. And he says, don't, uh, you know, look at the teacher and say, oh yeah, he's got a long beard, therefore I can have belief in him. Doubt what the teacher is saying. Not doubt in the sense of saying this is wrong, but the doubt which is created because we want to understand something, we want to clarify something, and therefore we have to ask the right questions. So Shraddha requires for us to ask this question with full awareness and attention, and therefore it means Shraddha is combining trust with unwavering attention, and also that there is a freedom to question and to know what the teacher is saying and to question that in order to have this complete clarity in our mind. Because clarity leads to commitment, and commitment leads to realization of the truth. So it's important for us to understand what Shraddha is. Very, very brief kind of description of Shraddha, what Shraddha is. But, we can do a whole session on Shraddha. It's such a wonderful topic. But Shraddha and Shabda Praman, these are the two things which Bhagwan is talking about here. So faith that is firmly rooted in the scriptures provides the best pathway for purification and liberation. So that is why the ordinance of the scriptures becomes so important. So Arjun is asking this question, and Bhagwan says, threefold is the faith of the embodied, which is inherent in their nature. So each one of us has got this nature, and that nature is the one which will determine whether it is sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. And therefore also the faith. The faith is colored by our temperament, and therefore we can say the faith is either sattvic or rajasic or tamasic. And he says here about this. Faith of each is in accordance with his nature. And man consists of his faith. As a man's faith is, so is he. So if I ask you this question, where is your faith? What is your faith? And how is your faith? What are the attributes of your faith? It becomes a vital question for us to answer. Why? Because as my faith, so am I. Why? Because my faith is the basis on which I'm going to make meaning of my life. I'm going to make my values based on that, and my choices and my actions are going to be based on that orientation which the faith is giving me. So, as my faith, so am I in myself and in relationship to the world. So, ask this question of yourself: where is your faith? What is your faith? So, the sattvic or the pure men worship the gods. The rajasic, who are the passionate, they worship the yakshas and the rakshasas. Now, yakshas are the ones which are got the and Kubera is really the chieftain of the yakshas, and he is the keeper of all the wealth in this universe. So the rajasic person is after what? Is after Kanchan, Kamini, and Kirti. Kanchan is wealth, Kamini is all this passion for various different things, and Kirti is name and fame. So Yaksha Kubera is going to give him the wealth, Kanchan. And the Rakshasas, which related to power and passion, that is going to be provided by the Rakshasas. Attainment through this kind of passion, through this power, is through the Rakshasas. So think of this as kind of energies within yourself. And this is a passionate person, full of Rajasic energies, is interested in attaining things and holding things, whether it is power, name and fame, wealth, whatever it is, I want to get this because it makes me feel complete. It makes me feel good. And then the Tamasika, the dark or the dull, they worship the ghost, pretas, and the host of bhutas and the nature and the spirit. Because their orientation is really towards the world. Bhutas means, the ghost as well. In other words, those things which nobody else can see, but they can see. These are things which, they're interested in, and they're oriented towards the material existence. And this is what their faith is based on, is that I only believe in things which I see. I only believe in what I see, and I'm only interested in things which give me pleasure and are related to indulging the senses. And those men who practice terrific austerities, not enjoined by the scriptures, given to hypocrisy and egoism, impelled by the force of lust and attachment, senselessly torturing all the elements in the body, and me also who dwell within the body, you may know these to be demoniacal resolves. Bhagwan has already told us these demoniacal qualities, and this is in opposition to those people who are not having, this kind of orientation towards sattva. So they don't have the divine qualities, but rather they have got the demoniacal qualities, so that even if they practice austerities, they are given to hypocrisy, egoism, and lust and attachments, and they torture their body in this kind of way. So that has to be ruled out. We don't want any of these, and we don't want any kind of rajasic or tamasic kind of faith. We want that which is the sattvic faith.